The air buzzed with anticipation as the crowd filed into the sleek, modern auditorium of Silicon Valley's most prestigious tech conference. This was where the brightest minds in technology gathered every year, a place where billion-dollar startups were born and ideas that could change the world took center stage. Investors, innovators, and tech moguls like Elon Musk sat in the front rows, ready to hear what the next big thing would be. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon was no stranger to being impressed. Over the years, he had seen countless inventions that promised to revolutionize the world. But today, he didn't expect what was about to happen. As the speakers wrapped up their introductions, a voice from the back of the auditorium broke through the formalities, cutting the air with a sense of urgency. "Excuse me," a young voice said, sharp and clear. "I think I have something that could change everything." The crowd paused, heads turning to locate the source. The voice belonged to a 12-year-old boy standing in the far back row, his hand raised high in the air like he'd just come up with the answer to a question no one had asked. His name? Owen Parker. Owen wasn't the usual attendee at a high-profile tech conference. His clothes were simple, worn jeans, a faded t-shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. But his eyes, bright, sharp, and full of determination, showed a different story. He wasn't just any kid. He was someone with a vision, someone with a spark that made even the most seasoned professionals look twice. Elon Musk, sitting at the center of the room, raised an eyebrow. This should be interesting, he thought. The teenager was obviously bold, but would he be able to back up his claim? The MC hesitated, unsure whether to entertain the interruption. But then, he saw the glimmer of curiosity in the crowd. With a slight nod, the MC gestured toward Owen. "Go ahead, young man. You have the floor." Owen took a deep breath, pushing past the nerves that were threatening to seize him. He'd been practicing this moment in his mind for months. This was the moment that could change everything. He stepped onto the stage, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. He stood before the room, his heart pounding in his chest, but his voice was steady as he spoke. "My name is Owen Parker. I'm here today because I believe that energy isn't just something we should consume. It's something we can capture and harness from thin air." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Owen continued, ignoring the growing buzz. "What if I told you that we could create a device that pulls energy from ambient air, free, renewable, and clean? My invention, AirCell, can do just that." He gestured to a small device he had brought with him, a sleek, transparent box about the size of a coffee cup. The audience was silent for a moment. Then the whispers began again, louder this time. The words "energy from air" were repeated in disbelief. Elon Musk sat back in his chair, intrigued but skeptical. A child? Talking about harnessing ambient energy? It sounded like a stretch, even for someone as familiar with innovation as him. Yet, there was something compelling about Owen. His conviction was infectious. Maybe the kid wasn't just playing with ideas. Maybe he was onto something. Owen took a step forward, his confidence growing with every word. "This device can power small electronics, charge batteries, and provide energy in areas where access to power is limited, anywhere. Imagine it in rural communities, in developing nations, or even in space where solar power isn't always reliable. AirCell could be the solution to a problem we've been facing for decades." As Owen spoke, a picture began to form in the minds of the audience, one where the world's energy problems could be solved, not with a new power grid or a massive coal plant, but with something as simple and powerful as the air itself. After a long pause, Elon Musk stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on Owen. The room went still. "Well," Elon said, his voice carrying across the room, "that's a bold claim. But I have to admit, I'm intrigued." The crowd erupted into applause. The tech moguls, the investors, and even the skeptical engineers in the room were starting to nod in approval. Owen Parker, a kid, a child, had just presented an idea that could, perhaps, change the world. Owen's heart was racing, but he couldn't wipe the grin off his face. He had done it. He had gotten Elon Musk's attention. As the applause died down, Elon spoke again. "You know what? I want to see more." Meet me after the session. Owen. I want to hear all about this. Aircell? Owen's mind spun. Was this real? Was he really going to meet Elon Musk, his hero, after this? He nodded, trying to hide the excitement that was bubbling inside him. Thank you, Mr. Musk. I'll be there. As Owen made his way off the stage, the reality of what had just happened began to set in. This could be the beginning of something huge. But as he walked off the stage, a thought crossed his mind. What if this wasn't enough? What if the tech world wasn't ready for his idea? For a moment, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on him, but he quickly shook it off. This was his chance. He had worked too hard for too long to let fear stop him now. The next step was clear. He was going to meet Elon Musk. Owen Parker's story didn't begin on a grand stage in Silicon Valley. It didn't start with a polished pitch or a room full of investors. It began in a small, quiet town in Maine, a place where the biggest excitement of the year was the local fair, and the closest thing to a tech startup was the corner diner's attempt at upgrading its coffee machine. But even in a town like this, Owen had always known that he was different. His father, Jake Parker, was a mechanic who ran a small repair shop on the edge of town. Owen spent most of his childhood in the dusty workshop, surrounded by spare parts, tools, and the sweet scent of motor oil. Jake was practical, grounded, and a bit stubborn, traits Owen had inherited in spades. The garage was Owen's playground, where he could take things apart and rebuild them from scratch. But it was his mother, Mia Parker, who had sparked his fascination with technology. Mia was an environmental scientist who worked for a nonprofit focused on sustainable energy solutions. Owen admired her for the way she talked about the future, about how technology could help preserve the Earth for future generations. It was Mia who introduced Owen to the concept of renewable energy when he was just 6 years old. She took him to see a wind farm on a field trip, and from that day forward, he couldn't stop thinking about how energy could come from places other than oil, coal, and gas. It wasn't until he was 8 that Owen built his first invention, a small solar-powered fan that ran off the energy collected from the sun. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but to Owen, it was magic. The idea that a simple device could harness the power of the sun and make something move was mesmerizing. For the first time in his life, he understood the power of innovation. By the time he was 11, Owen had started building things that were far more complicated than solar-powered toys. His bedroom looked more like a mini laboratory than a place to sleep. There were shelves full of books on renewable energy, discarded gadgets he'd tried to repair, and scribbled blueprints for inventions he hadn't yet built. Some of them worked. Most didn't. But each failure taught him something new, and that was the thrill of it. For Owen, there was no greater joy than making something out of nothing. But there was one problem. The kids at school didn't understand. To most of them, Owen was just that weird kid who spent too much time talking about things like green technology and energy efficiency. They didn't get why he preferred to hang out with his tools rather than playing video games or going to the movies. "You're a science geek, Owen," his classmate Tyler Jennings once said, laughing as he passed Owen in the hallway. "Why don't you just go build yourself a robot or something?" Owen didn't let it bother him. Tyler, along with most of the other kids, didn't understand the kind of dream that burned inside him. His passion for sustainable energy was his own, something that felt bigger than anything he could explain to the other kids. They had their games and their social circles. Owen had his inventions, and that was enough for him. It wasn't until his mother took him to a conference about renewable energy when he was 10 that Owen's world started to expand. At the conference, he met professionals who spoke about the very things Owen had only read about in books. He listened to stories about how solar energy could power entire cities and how wind farms were helping to reduce carbon emissions. It was the first time he truly believed he could make a difference. One evening, as he was sitting in his bedroom working on a new idea, his mother came in and sat on the edge of his bed. "You know," she said, "there's a whole world out there that could use your ideas. You're not the only one who wants to change things, but you'll need to learn how to make them work in the real world, not just in your room." Owen turned to her, his eyes bright. "I will. I'll make it work. Just wait. One day, people will see." Mia smiled. "I know you will." That night, Owen made a promise to himself. He wasn't just going to build gadgets for fun. He was going to build things that mattered. He was going to create inventions that could change the world, not just make it a little more interesting for himself. And that's how Aircell was born. It wasn't long after that night when Owen started thinking seriously about how to make his dream of clean, renewable energy a reality. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. He'd need to learn more, experiment more, and face a lot of challenges. But it didn't matter to him. He was ready. By the time he was 12, Owen had already perfected a small prototype for his energy harvesting device. It was nothing like the polished product he would eventually show to Elon Musk, but it was a start. The device, an early version of Aircell, was clunky, a bit rough around the edges, but it worked. He could feel the spark of electricity flowing through it as he turned the switch on. It was the first real step towards something huge. That was the version Owen presented at the National Science Fair, where his journey took a sharp turn. His invention didn't win. In fact, it didn't even make it into the top 3. But the experience was invaluable. The feedback he received helped him understand where his creation fell short and gave him the tools he needed to improve it. After the fair, Owen didn't sulk in disappointment. He went straight back to his workshop, determined to fix the flaws and build a better version. The next step would be proving that Aircell wasn't just a dream. It was a solution. And so, when the invitation came to present at a tech conference, Owen knew it was his moment. He wasn't just another kid from a small town. He was an inventor, and his idea had the potential to change everything. The first few weeks after Owen's presentation at the tech conference were a blur. He had returned to his small town in Maine, but he didn't feel like the same kid anymore. People around him started to look at him differently. His teachers, his neighbors, even the kids who used to mock him. They were all talking about him. Some of it was praise. Some of it was skepticism. "I saw you on TV," one of his classmates, Kara Matthews, said the next day at school. "You were on the news talking about your Aircell? That's crazy. But does it really work?" Owen could tell she was genuinely curious, but there was a hint of doubt in her voice. That was the problem. Everyone had heard about the 12-year-old kid who claimed he could solve the world's energy crisis, but no one seemed to understand how. They didn't see the months of hard work behind the device or the late nights spent tinkering with broken parts. To them, it was just another wild idea. And it wasn't just the kids at school. Owen's parents were starting to show signs of concern. His dad, Jake, wasn't exactly sold on the idea of Owen pushing his invention so publicly. One evening, as Owen was working in the garage, Jake walked in, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was serious. "Owen, we need to talk." Owen looked up, frowning. He had been assembling a new version of Aircell, and he was excited about some of the improvements he'd made. But his father's tone made him uneasy. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" Jake hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I know you've been working hard on this project of yours, but I'm worried you're putting all your eggs in one basket." Owen's heart sank. He'd heard that phrase before, especially when it came to ideas that seemed too big to be true. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Jake began, sitting on a workbench nearby, "this thing you're building. It's an incredible idea. I get that. But you've got to understand that not everyone's going to see it that way. There's a lot of money and resources tied up in energy the way we've always done it. And the people who are already in control of that don't want to see something like Aircell come along. They're not just going to let you change the world overnight." Owen's mind raced. But what if it works? What if Aircell really could change things? Think about how many people could have access to power if this works, Dad. We could make a huge difference. Jake sighed. "I know, Owen. I really do. But I've been around long enough to see how the world works. People in charge don't just change their minds overnight. And sometimes, they'll do whatever it takes to protect their interests, even if it means stepping on someone else to do it." Owen stared at his father, stunned by the words. Step on someone else? The thought of people actively working against his dream, just to protect their power, had never even crossed his mind. "Dad, I don't care how hard it is. I'm not backing down. I believe in Aircell," Owen said, his voice firmer than he felt. "I know it's going to work." Jake looked at him, his expression softening but still filled with concern. "I just don't want you to get hurt, son. There are people out there who'll try to take advantage of you. People who won't care about your dreams, only their profits." Owen didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to his workbench, trying to focus on the latest model he was assembling. His father's words kept echoing in his head, though. The reality of what he was up against was starting to hit him. Aircell wasn't just a cool gadget, it was a potential disruptor. People who had spent decades building their empires wouldn't just let a 12-year-old take it all away with a simple invention. And if it really did work, there were going to be forces that would try to crush it before it could even take off. That night, after finishing his work, Owen sat alone in his room, staring at the prototype of Aircell. The device was small, sleek, and still imperfect, but it had the potential to be revolutionary. He wasn't about to give up, but the pressure, the weight of it all, was starting to sink in. Meanwhile, word of his invention had spread beyond his small town and beyond Silicon Valley. Articles about Owen and Aircell began to pop up in tech blogs, and people started reaching out, some offering help, some offering advice, and some offering threats. A phone call from an unknown number one evening only added to his anxiety. "Is this Owen Parker?" The voice on the other end asked, a low, controlled tone. "Yes, who's this?" Owen asked, his heart racing. "I'm someone who's been following your work. Let's just say, you're in over your head. I suggest you stop playing with things you don't fully understand. Trust me, kid, you don't want to go down this road." Before Owen could respond, the line went dead. The conversation left him shaken. It wasn't just people doubting his idea. Now, someone was actively threatening him, warning him to stop. Was it someone from a big corporation? Was it an investor who felt threatened? Or was it someone else entirely? The feeling of being watched, being hunted, even, began to feel all too real. The weeks following the anonymous phone call were a blur of fear and determination. Owen's heart was racing every time his phone buzzed, every time an email arrived in his inbox, and every time someone from the media reached out with an offer or a question. It was all becoming overwhelming. But despite the fear gnawing at him, Owen refused to back down. His family, however, was starting to feel the strain. Jake, who had always been his steady anchor, began to ask questions about the risks Owen was taking. Mia, too, seemed concerned, especially when she learned that Owen had been getting strange messages. "Maybe we should pull back for a bit," Mia suggested one evening as she sat beside him at the kitchen table, her voice tinged with worry. "These people, they don't play fair. They have resources, connections. We need to be careful." Owen felt a tight knot in his chest. Careful? He had been careful his whole life, keeping his ideas to himself, never showing anyone what he truly believed in. He couldn't just stop now. Aircell wasn't just an idea. It was his legacy, the solution that could change everything. "I can't," Owen said quietly. "Not after everything I've already put into this. I can't just quit now." But even as he said the words, he knew things were getting more dangerous. There were whispers in the media, rumors that Aircell might be a scam, or worse, that Owen was just a puppet in someone else's game. With each passing day, the pressure mounted, and it felt as if the walls were closing in. Then, the opportunity of a lifetime arrived. The United Nations announced a global summit on sustainable energy solutions. The world's most influential leaders, innovators, and investors would be in attendance. And to Owen's astonishment, he received an invitation to present Aircell as part of a panel of rising stars in renewable energy technology. It was the validation he'd been waiting for, the chance to prove to the world and to the skeptics that he wasn't just some kid with a dream. He was someone with the solution. The conference was to be held in New York, and Owen knew this was the moment that could either make or break him. With Elon Musk still in the back of his mind, and a team of international experts ready to evaluate his invention, Owen knew he had no choice but to go. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mia and Jake supported him in their own ways, though they were still worried about the risks. His father even offered to drive him to the airport, despite the long hours he worked at the shop. "Just remember, son," Jake said as they drove, "this is your dream. No matter what happens, be proud of what you've done." Owen smiled, though inside, his nerves were starting to surface. This could be it. If Aircell worked as he hoped, he would be presenting it to some of the most influential people in the world. When the day of the summit arrived, Owen felt a cocktail of emotions, excitement, fear, and a sense of overwhelming responsibility. He had never been in a room with so many powerful people, and yet, Standing backstage, just a few minutes before he was supposed to speak, Owen felt a strange sense of calm. He was about to change everything. As he walked onto the stage, the bright lights of the auditorium nearly blinded him. He was greeted by a sea of faces, many of them skeptics, some of them eager to hear what he had to say. Elon Musk was in the front row, his arms crossed and a curious expression on his face. This time, Owen was determined to impress him and everyone else. The moderator introduced him briefly, and Owen took his place at the podium. He felt the eyes of the world on him, and for a moment, his nerves threatened to take over. But then, he remembered why he was here. He had spent years working on this. Aircell wasn't just his invention. It was a chance for the world to move closer to a sustainable future. Ladies and gentlemen, Owen began. His voice clear and confident. I'm Owen Parker, and I'm here to show you that the future of energy is in the air. He unveiled the latest model of Aircell, a sleeker, more refined version than the one he had shown at the tech conference. The device hummed softly as it powered up, and Owen's voice filled the auditorium with a sense of purpose. This small, portable device can harvest energy from the air, energy that's free, renewable, and clean. We live in a world where millions of people still lack access to reliable power. Aircell could be the solution we need to bridge that gap. Imagine a future where every home, every business, and every community could harness the energy of the air around them. No more reliance on traditional power grids or fossil fuels. The audience was quiet, listening intently. Owen's heart pounded in his chest, but his voice didn't falter. It works by using a combination of advanced materials and energy conversion systems to extract ambient energy from the environment. This is just the beginning, but it's a step towards something much greater. As he spoke, he could see the expressions in the crowd shift. People were paying attention. Some were skeptical, yes, but others were nodding, intrigued, excited even. Among the audience, he spotted Elon Musk, who was leaning forward now, a glint of interest in his eyes. For the first time, Owen allowed himself to believe that this could be real, that his invention could truly change the world. When the presentation ended, the room erupted into applause. For Owen, it felt like a moment frozen in time. The pressure, the doubts, the fears, all of it melted away as he stood there, humbled by the response. This was it. He had just taken the first giant leap toward his dream. After the presentation, Owen was swarmed by journalists and experts, all eager to ask him about the future of Aircell. But there was one person he had to speak to before anyone else, Elon Musk. The two of them finally met backstage, where Elon extended his hand. "Nice work, Owen," he said, his voice genuine. "I have to admit, I wasn't sure about this at first, but now, I think you might be onto something. Let's talk." Owen felt a surge of relief. This wasn't just any conversation. It was a chance to secure the future of his invention. The days following the summit were a blur of excitement, phone calls, and emails. Owen was still riding the high from his successful presentation at the United Nations Sustainable Energy Summit, but something had shifted. The tech world was buzzing about Aircell, and even skeptics couldn't ignore the potential it had. Media outlets were calling it the breakthrough of the year. Investors started reaching out, eager to discuss partnerships and funding. Owen was finally on the map. But despite all the attention, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As he sat in his bedroom late one night, scrolling through the hundreds of messages pouring in from across the globe, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello? Owen, it's Mia." His mom's voice was shaky. "There's been an incident." Owen's stomach dropped. "What happened?" His mother paused before speaking again. "It's about your dad." Before Owen could respond, the line went silent for a moment, and then he heard her choked voice again. "He's been in an accident. He was driving home from the shop, and he lost control of the car. Owen, he's in the hospital." Owen's world tilted. Everything, the excitement, the attention, the meetings with Elon Musk, suddenly felt distant and insignificant. His thoughts were jumbled, racing in every direction. His father, the one person who had always believed in him, was now fighting for his life. Without a second thought, Owen grabbed his jacket and rushed out the door. The cold air hit his face like a slap, but it barely registered. His mind was spinning, consumed by the worst possible thoughts. What if his dad didn't make it? What if everything he had been working for was now meaningless? He arrived at the hospital an hour later, his heart pounding in his chest. His mother was sitting in the waiting room, her face pale, eyes red from crying. Owen's legs nearly gave out beneath him when he saw her. "Mom, how bad is it?" he asked, his voice trembling. Mia stood and wrapped her arms around him tightly. "They're doing everything they can, Owen. But it's not good. The doctors, they don't know if he's going to make it." Owen felt a lump form in his throat, but he swallowed it down. "Can I see him?" Mia nodded, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes. "Just be prepared. He's not awake yet, and we don't know what the next few hours will bring." Owen followed her down the sterile hallways of the hospital, his steps heavy with each passing second. When they reached his father's room, Owen's heart stopped in his chest. Jake Parker lay unconscious, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily, the only sound in the room. His face was bruised, his right leg was in a cast, and his chest was wrapped in bandages. Owen stood frozen at the doorway, his eyes locked on his father's pale, lifeless form. Why did this happen? Owen whispered to himself, fighting back tears. His mother gave him a soft look of reassurance. "Accidents happen, Owen. You know that. But he's strong. He'll pull through." Owen didn't know if he believed her. All he could think about was how much his dad had sacrificed for him, how many late nights Jake had spent in the garage with him, helping him piece together his inventions. Jake had never once doubted Owen's dream, always encouraging him to keep going, even when it seemed impossible. And now he was lying here, fighting for his life, all because of an accident. The next few hours passed in a blur of waiting, doctors coming in and out, and a feeling of helplessness that clawed at Owen's insides. The worst part was that he couldn't be in control of the situation. Aircell, his invention, his dream, none of it mattered right now. The one person who had supported him through all of it was the one who needed him most. As the night wore on, Owen sat beside his father's bed, holding his hand tightly. He thought about what his father had told him just a few days earlier. "This is your dream, son. Be proud of what you've done." He hadn't realized it at the time, but his dad's words were more than just encouragement. They were a promise. Jake had believed in him, even when the world was skeptical. And now, Owen had to believe in his father, too. He had to believe that Jake would make it through this, that he would be there to see Aircell change the world. It was nearly dawn when the doctor finally came in with news. The words "stable" and "recovery" felt like a lifeline. Jake had pulled through. The road to recovery would be long, but he was going to make it. Relief flooded through Owen, but it wasn't the same as before. Everything had changed. The focus was no longer on fame or proving something to the world. It was about family. It was about being there for his dad, about honoring the sacrifices Jake had made for him. Owen knew that no matter what happened with Aircell, he would do everything he could to help his father heal. Later that afternoon, Owen sat outside the hospital in the cool, late autumn air, staring at his phone. There was a message from Elon Musk, along with several missed calls from investors and reporters. But right now, none of it seemed important. He thought about the phone call from his mother, about the way everything had suddenly come to a halt. Aircell was still a part of him, but it wasn't the only part. His family was what mattered now. But just as he was about to turn off his phone, a message from Elon Musk caught his eye. "Owen, I've been following your progress closely. We need to talk. Meet me in California next week. Let's make this happen." Owen's heart skipped a beat. The future was still waiting for him. But now, he knew it wasn't just about changing the world. It was about remembering the people who believed in him along the way, and making sure that he stayed true to the promise he'd made to himself and his father. The following weeks were a blur of hospital visits, long nights spent at his father's bedside, and quiet moments of reflection. Owen's father, Jake, was slowly recovering, though the doctors made it clear it would take time. His leg was in a cast, and he had several broken ribs, but his spirit remained unbroken. The bond between father and son grew even stronger as Owen helped him with his daily tasks, reading to him when his father's voice was too weak to speak, and telling him about the latest developments with Aircell. As the days went on, Owen found that the whirlwind of fame and pressure around his invention had quieted. The media had backed off. The investors had stopped calling, at least for now. But Owen knew it wasn't over. He still had the chance to change the world, and in the quiet moments, when he was sitting next to his dad, he couldn't help but think about everything he had learned. The night before he was supposed to fly out to California to meet Elon Musk, Owen sat outside the hospital, looking at the stars. The cool autumn air filled his lungs, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. He'd been so focused on the future, on proving himself, on the idea of changing the world, that he had forgotten to appreciate the present. The people who loved him, the life that was right in front of him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, seeing a message from Mia. "I just wanted to remind you how proud I am of you, Owen. No matter what happens next, you've already made an impact. And you've got a family who loves you." Tears welled up in his eyes as he read the message. Mia had always been there for him, even when things were uncertain. He typed back quickly, "Thanks, Mom. I needed that." The next morning, Owen said goodbye to his dad at the hospital. Jake, still propped up with pillows, gave him a weak smile. "Go make it happen, Owen," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "I'll be here when you get back. You've got this." "I won't let you down, Dad," Owen said, his voice firm. As Owen boarded the plane to California, a strange feeling washed over him. He was still young, but he was starting to realize just how far he had come. The world wasn't just a place full of problems. It was full of opportunities, too. And for the first time, he wasn't in it alone. His father, his mother, his friends, Mia, Kara, and even people like Elon Musk were all part of his journey. They were the foundation on which his dreams were built. The flight to California was long, but Owen barely noticed the time. His mind kept drifting back to everything he had been through. The presentation at the summit, the terrifying phone call from Mia, the late nights at his father's bedside. He realized that it was all part of something bigger than he had imagined. Success wasn't just about Aircell or any one invention. It was about perseverance, about the people who stood by you, and about finding strength in the face of adversity. When Owen arrived in California, he was met by a team of engineers and assistants who guided him through the Tesla headquarters. The place was buzzing with innovation and energy, but all Owen could think about was Elon Musk, the man who had inspired him, who had shown the world that impossible ideas could become reality. After a brief tour of the campus, Owen was led into a sleek, glass-walled conference room. Elon was already there, sitting at the head of the table, his usual calm and calculating demeanor replaced by a subtle excitement. "You made it," Elon said, standing to shake Owen's hand. "I have to admit, I didn't expect much at first, but after seeing your work, I think you've got something special here." Owen felt a wave of relief flood through him. "Thanks, Mr. Musk. I've been working on this for years, and I really believe Aircell can change everything. It's not just about energy. It's about giving people the freedom to live better lives." Elon nodded, his eyes twinkling with interest. "I can see that. But here's the thing. There's a lot of risk in what you're trying to do, Owen, and a lot of money tied up in the traditional energy systems. But I think you're ready for what comes next." Owen felt his heart beat faster. He had no idea where this conversation would go, but he knew it was the chance of a lifetime. "We're going to need to get serious about the technology. It's going to take a lot of resources, a lot of investment, and a lot of time. But I want to help. We'll put together a team, get you the funding you need, and make sure Aircell reaches its potential." For the first time in what felt like forever, Owen felt like everything he had worked for was finally starting to fall into place. He wasn't just some kid from Maine anymore. He was an inventor with a chance to make history. But it wasn't just about the fame, or the money, or even the accolades. It was about making a real difference. As the meeting continued, Owen's mind wandered back to his father's words, "Go make it happen." He could hear Jake's voice in his mind, and for the first time, he understood the true meaning of those words. The world was full of challenges, but the real journey was about staying true to your vision, no matter what. Aircell might change the world, but it was the journey that mattered the most. The people who supported him, the lessons learned, the sacrifices made. All of it had brought him here, and that, in itself, was worth everything. When the meeting ended, Elon stood up and offered Owen his hand. "Let's make this happen, Owen. Welcome to the team." Owen shook Elon's hand firmly, a smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, Mr. Musk. I won't let you down." As he left the room, a sense of peace washed over him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Owen felt ready for whatever came next. He had a purpose, a team, and a world of possibilities ahead of him. And no matter what, he knew he would continue to move forward with the same drive and determination that had carried him this far. The future was waiting. The days after his meeting with Elon Musk were nothing short of a whirlwind. Owen had expected a flood of excitement, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer scale of what was about to unfold. Tesla's team had already started drafting plans for the next steps, and Owen found himself thrust into a world of high-level meetings, design sprints, and funding discussions. The future of AirCell was suddenly in the hands of the biggest names in technology, and Owen was right at the center of it all. But amidst the chaos, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He had always been in control of his own journey, shaping his vision one step at a time. But now, with Elon Musk and his team guiding the project, Owen had to learn to balance his own aspirations with the demands of a much larger operation. It was an early morning when Owen received the call that would change everything. He was sitting in the Tesla headquarters in Palo Alto, still adjusting to the constant buzz of activity around him. Elon had asked him to come in for a strategy meeting, and Owen had just settled into his seat when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Owen, this is Kara." The voice on the other end crackled, filled with static. Kara was one of his childhood friends, and though they drifted apart after high school, they kept in touch sporadically. "Listen, I've got something you need to hear. You won't believe this." Owen's stomach dropped. Kara's voice was urgent, almost frantic. "What's going on?" he asked, suddenly alert. "It's about your father. He's gone missing." Owen's world stopped. His father? Missing? He couldn't process it. Jake had been recovering, slowly but surely, from his accident. He had been getting better, regaining strength every day, and now this? "What do you mean, gone missing?" Owen's voice was shaky, the gravity of Kara's words sinking in. "I don't know all the details, but I got a call from one of the nurses at the hospital. They say he disappeared overnight. No one knows where he went. It's like he just vanished. You need to come back home. Something doesn't feel right about this, Owen." Panic set in. Owen's thoughts raced. Had his father left the hospital on his own? Was it possible he was abducted? Or had he simply decided to leave? His mind was spinning, and for the first time since his father's accident, he felt completely helpless. "I'm coming home," Owen said, barely able to hold it together. "I'll be on the next flight." The flight back to Maine felt longer than any other Owen had ever taken. He couldn't focus on anything but the thought of his father. Where could he possibly be? Why would he leave? Had something happened to him? As soon as the plane touched down, Owen rushed straight to the hospital, his heart pounding in his chest. He was greeted by the same nurse who had called Kara, and her face was etched with confusion. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Parker. We've searched the entire facility, and we can't find your father. His room was empty when we checked this morning," she explained, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Owen felt a chill run down his spine. It didn't make sense. His father wouldn't have just walked away. Not after everything that had happened. There was no explanation. "We need to call the police," the nurse said, her voice growing more panicked. "This isn't normal. Something's wrong." Owen nodded, feeling the walls close in around him. What had happened to his father? He went outside to the parking lot, his mind a blur, when his phone buzzed again. It was a text from Mia. "Owen, please be careful. There's something strange happening. Someone's been asking about AirCell. It's not just about your father anymore." Owen's heart skipped a beat. Who could be asking about AirCell? The media had already hyped it up, but this didn't feel like normal press attention. It felt darker. Someone knew something he didn't, and now they were tying it to his father's disappearance. He immediately called Mia, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic turned to frustration. He had to find answers. For his father and for himself. The next day, Owen began his own search for his father, retracing his father's steps in the days before he disappeared. He visited the hospital again, searching for any clues that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing. No sign of a struggle, no indications of why Jake would have left. It wasn't until he went to the local diner, the one his father frequented for coffee, that Owen started to piece together a strange lead. The waitress who knew his father well mentioned something unsettling. "He wasn't himself last week," she said, wiping down the counter nervously. "Kept talking about secrets, things that didn't make sense. He said he was going to fix things, but he didn't explain what." "Fix things?" Owen echoed, confused. "What does that mean?" "I don't know, Han. He just seemed different. He didn't stay long, but he paid in cash and left in a hurry." Owen's thoughts raced. What had his father been involved in? He had always been a quiet man, content with his work, his family, and his garage. But the way the waitress spoke suggested that Jake had known something he hadn't shared, a secret that could explain his disappearance. Then, something clicked. The AirCell project had put him in contact with some of the most influential people in the world. Could someone have known about it? And more importantly, could someone have used his father to get to Owen? He had to confront Elon. He had to know what was really going on. That evening, Owen called Elon, his fingers trembling as he dialed the number. "Mr. Musk, I need to talk to you," Owen said urgently when Elon picked up. "Something's happening. My father is missing, and I think it's connected to AirCell. I need answers." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Elon spoke, his tone more serious than Owen had ever heard it. "Meet me tomorrow. We'll figure this out. I'll help you, Owen. But be careful. You're not the only one interested in AirCell." The next day, Owen barely slept. His mind was consumed by the questions swirling around him. His father's disappearance, the strange hints of something darker behind AirCell, and Elon's cryptic words left him with a growing sense of unease. Owen knew something big was at play, something he didn't fully understand yet. As the sun began to rise, Owen quickly packed his bags and grabbed a coffee to go. The quiet, still morning outside the diner felt almost surreal. How could the world feel so peaceful when his life had been turned upside down? He drove to Tesla's headquarters, his thoughts constantly shifting between worry for his father and the nagging sense that he was only scratching the surface of something far more dangerous. When Owen arrived at the meeting spot, a private conference room tucked away on the Tesla campus, Elon Musk was already there, standing by a table with a laptop open in front of him. The usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by an urgency in his eyes that Owen hadn't expected. Elon was no longer the visionary leader who inspired Owen from afar. Now, he was a man who seemed deeply entangled in a situation that demanded all his attention. "Owen, we need to move quickly," Elon said, ushering him into the room and closing the door behind them. "What's happening to your father? What exactly are you dealing with?" Owen's chest tightened. "That's what I need you to explain, Elon. AirCell, my father's disappearance, it's all connected. I don't know how, but I can feel it. And I think someone's been manipulating everything from the start." Elon sat down and gestured for Owen to take a seat. The room was sterile and modern, filled with sleek furniture and giant windows that overlooked the Silicon Valley skyline. But none of it felt welcoming to Owen. It felt cold, as though the walls were closing in. "We've been keeping an eye on things," Elon began, his voice lowering. "There are forces involved in AirCell that are less than transparent. I wasn't going to tell you this until you were ready, but it seems there's no time left for secrets." Owen felt his heart rate quicken. "What do you mean?" Elon clicked a few keys on his laptop, and an image appeared on the screen. It was a map, but not a typical map. It showed major energy grids, energy production sites, and various connections. A series of red dots blinked across the globe, highlighting places where major shifts in energy usage had occurred recently. "This is the global energy network," Elon said. "As you know, AirCell has the potential to disrupt it completely. But there are powerful players, billion-dollar companies, governments, and underground networks that have a vested interest in keeping energy the way it is. They want to control it. And your father, well, I think he knew more than we thought." Owen leaned forward, his mind racing. "What are you saying, Elon? Are you suggesting that my father was involved in some conspiracy? That he knew something that someone didn't want him to share?" Elon nodded slowly. I think your father was caught in the middle of something much bigger than Aircell. I believe he was targeted. There's a group, a shadow organization, who have been monitoring your progress even before you launched Aircell. They've seen the potential of your technology, and they've been taking steps to neutralize threats. Owen's mind spun. Who are these people? What do they want with me with Aircell? We don't have all the answers yet, Elon said, standing up. But I've already made arrangements for us to investigate further. We need to go to California's Central Research Lab. It's where the first prototype of Aircell was tested, and it's where things started to get complicated. Owen's head was spinning. It felt like everything was moving too fast, like he was in a movie, caught between two worlds. One where his father was just an ordinary man, and another where he might have been deeply involved in something far more dangerous. Later that day, Owen and Elon boarded a private jet, headed for the Tesla Research Lab in the California desert, a secluded place far removed from the bustle of Silicon Valley. The ride was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Owen couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of dread. The journey ahead wasn't just about uncovering what happened to his father. It was about discovering just how far the conspiracy stretched. When they arrived at the lab, the atmosphere felt eerily tense. This wasn't the kind of place where innovations like Aircell were celebrated. It was a fortress, guarded and controlled. Elon led Owen inside, past rows of secretive machines and high-tech prototypes. But nothing felt as important as what they were about to uncover. Elon turned to him, his voice serious. We're about to see the file your father was working on. It's encrypted, but I've got the clearance. It's time you knew exactly what your dad was involved in. Owen swallowed hard. What's in that file? You'll see. They walked deeper into the lab, through corridors that felt like they could be hiding anything. They reached a secure terminal, and Elon quickly entered the access codes. The screen flickered for a moment before revealing a massive encrypted file, the label flashing on the screen. Project Gemini. Elon turned to Owen. This is the key. Your father was involved in this project. It's the reason your invention has drawn so much attention. And it's the reason your father is missing. Owen could barely breathe. Project Gemini? What was it? And why hadn't his father told him about it? Elon typed a few more commands, and the file opened, revealing a series of detailed documents. Owen stared at the screen, his heart racing. The documents described Project Gemini as a covert initiative, one that involved advanced energy technology even more powerful than Aircell, but with military applications. It seemed that the project wasn't just about revolutionizing energy, it was about controlling it and perhaps even weaponizing it. As Owen scanned the files, one line caught his attention. Subject: Jake Parker, lead developer. Status: active. Last known location: unknown. Elon: my dad was part of this? Owen's voice was barely a whisper. Elon nodded gravely. I think your father discovered something about Project Gemini that put him in danger. He was trying to warn someone. And I believe the people who took him know you're the only one who can stop it. Owen's mind was reeling. This was bigger than he could have ever imagined. Aircell wasn't just an invention. It was a key to something much darker and more dangerous. His father's disappearance wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. We have to find him, Owen said, determination in his voice. We need to end this before it's too late. Owen could hardly believe what he had just uncovered. Project Gemini, his father's involvement in a high-stakes, covert energy initiative, was more than just an invention gone wrong. It was a ticking time bomb, a technological advancement with implications that could change the balance of power in the world. His father had known too much, and in the wrong hands, the technology behind Aircell could be weaponized. The questions were piling up faster than Owen could process them. Why hadn't his father told him? Who else was involved? And most importantly, why had his father gone missing just as the truth started to surface? Elon's eyes remained fixed on the screen as he scanned through the decrypted files. We need to find out exactly what your father was working on. These documents are incomplete, and there are gaps in the timeline. But what we do know is that your father's disappearance isn't just about Aircell. It's about something much bigger. Owen clenched his fists, a deep sense of urgency surging within him. You said he was trying to warn someone. Warn them about what? Elon exhaled deeply, leaning back in his chair. I think your father found out something that someone didn't want him to. Project Gemini wasn't just about creating an energy source. It was about harnessing that energy in ways that could be catastrophic. The military connections go deeper than we thought. Owen, the people involved, they'll stop at nothing to control it. Owen's heart pounded in his chest. The stakes were too high now. His father wasn't just a casualty in some tech revolution. He was part of a battle for the future of the world. And Owen had just been thrown into the middle of it. "We need to find my dad," Owen said, his voice sharp with determination. "If he's in danger, I'm going after him. No more waiting." Elon nodded, his gaze serious. "We will. But we have to be smart about this. There are people looking for both of us now. People who will do anything to keep Project Gemini under wraps. They've probably been tracking your movements ever since you started working on AirCell." The realization hit Owen like a sledgehammer. He wasn't just up against a tech conspiracy. He was up against a global network of powerful organizations who wanted to control the future of energy. And they weren't afraid to use force to make sure no one got in their way. "We need to get ahead of them," Elon continued, typing rapidly on his laptop. "I have some connections who can help us track down your father. But we need to be careful. These people are professionals. They have eyes everywhere." Owen stood up, the weight of the situation settling over him like a storm cloud. "Where do we start?" "First, we'll need to track down the last known location of your father," Elon said, tapping the screen in front of him. "We've narrowed it down to a facility in the Nevada desert, an old, abandoned military base. I think it's where your father was last working on the prototype for Project Gemini." A chill ran down Owen's spine. The desert, of course. It made sense. It had to be a place where few people would stumble upon the truth, where secrets could be buried in the sand and hidden from the world. "We need to get there fast," Owen said, his voice tense. "Before anyone else does." The private jet soared through the skies, heading toward Nevada. The hours seemed to stretch on forever. Owen sat in the back of the jet, staring out of the window, barely registering the landscape below. His mind was consumed with thoughts of his father and the shadowy organization that seemed to be hunting him. The file had revealed so little, yet so much. Project Gemini was a larger web, and Owen was now tangled in it. When they arrived at the airstrip near the desert, the sun was already beginning to set, casting long shadows over the barren landscape. The air was thick with heat, and the place felt desolate, a forgotten corner of the world. Owen and Elon climbed into an armored vehicle, and as they drove toward the facility, Owen could feel the tension building between them. "I can feel it," Elon said, breaking the silence. "Whatever your father found, he uncovered something big. And it's not going to be easy to get to the truth. The people behind Project Gemini are ruthless." Owen didn't respond. He was lost in thought, his mind replaying every conversation he'd ever had with his father. Had there been signs? Had Jake tried to tell him something that he hadn't understood at the time? As they approached the facility, Owen's pulse quickened. The base loomed in front of them, an imposing structure surrounded by high fences and watchtowers. It was like something out of a spy thriller, only this wasn't a movie. This was real. They parked the vehicle a safe distance away and donned their gear. Elon led the way, using his expertise to guide them through the labyrinthine complex of tunnels and hidden doors. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. There were signs that the place had been abandoned for years, but the technology inside seemed strangely advanced, as if someone had been using the facility in secret. "Look at this," Elon said, stopping in front of a series of monitors displaying various data points. "This is what your father was working on, real-time energy manipulation. But it's not just about energy production. This data points to a military-grade energy weapon." Owen's stomach dropped. A weapon? This was worse than he thought. His father hadn't just been working on a revolutionary energy source. He had been involved in a project that could alter the balance of power between nations. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the hallway. Footsteps. Someone was coming. "Get down," Elon hissed, pulling Owen behind a nearby column. The tension in the air was palpable as the sound of footsteps grew louder. They waited, barely breathing, until the figure passed them in the dim light. "Who was that?" Owen whispered. "Security," Elon replied, his voice low. "We're not alone here." This place is still active, and someone is guarding it. But they don't know we're here yet. Let's keep moving. As they ventured deeper into the facility, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He had no idea who was behind Project Gemini, but it was clear that there were people who would kill to keep its secrets. The more he learned, the more the stakes grew. His father's disappearance wasn't just personal. It was about the future of the world itself. They reached the heart of the facility, a high-tech lab with rows of glowing computers and strange equipment that looked like something out of a science fiction novel. In the center of the room was a large metallic box, connected to multiple wires and devices. It looked like the core of Project Gemini, and Owen's heart raced as he approached it. Elon turned to him, his face grim. "This is it. This is what your father was protecting. And whatever happens next, Owen, you need to be ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" The metallic doors of the lab creaked open, and a rush of cold air hit Owen's face. The tension was unbearable as he stepped deeper into the heart of the facility, the weight of the unknown pressing heavily on his chest. Every step he took seemed to echo in the vast, sterile space, and every shadow felt like a hidden threat, watching, waiting. Elon was right beside him, his eyes scanning the room, constantly alert. "We're getting closer," he muttered. "Your father was definitely working on something huge here. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined." Owen didn't respond. His mind was racing, piecing together everything he had learned so far. Project Gemini wasn't just about energy. It was a weapon. It was a tool for global control. His father, the man who had always been a source of strength and inspiration for him, had been at the center of something far more dangerous than Owen could have ever anticipated. They reached the center of the lab, where the large metallic box stood. It was surrounded by cables, wires, and machines, each more complex than the last. Elon began to inspect the equipment, typing rapidly on the nearby console. "This is disturbing," Elon murmured, tapping through layers of encrypted data. "It's not just an energy generator. It's a disruptor. This technology has the potential to cripple entire nations if used incorrectly." Owen stared at the screen, his heart pounding. The data was overwhelming. There were formulas, blueprints, and equations that explained how the technology worked, but the true implications weren't clear until Elon pointed to a specific line of code. "This is it," Elon said, his voice tight. "This line here, it's the key to everything. If activated, Project Gemini can manipulate the power grids of entire countries. It can cause blackouts, disrupt communications, even collapse economies. But that's not the worst part. This technology can also be weaponized into something much more destructive, something that could change the face of warfare forever." Owen felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath him. He had known his father was working on something groundbreaking, but this was beyond his worst nightmares. "But why didn't he tell me?" Owen asked, his voice cracking. If he knew how dangerous this was, why didn't he just shut it down? Why keep it a secret? Elon paused, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Because your father wasn't just trying to build a better energy source. He was trying to stop it from being used as a weapon. And the people behind this project? They were going to stop at nothing to control it. Your father, he was the only one who could have stopped them." Owen's thoughts were a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. His father hadn't just been a victim of a conspiracy. He had been an unwilling player in a game much larger than he had ever imagined. And now, Owen was thrust into the middle of it. The truth was unfolding before him, but it didn't bring the clarity he had hoped for. Instead, it brought only more questions and more danger. Suddenly, the doors of the lab slammed shut, and the lights flickered. Owen's breath caught in his throat as the sound of footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. They were no longer alone. "Get to the back door," Elon whispered urgently. "We have to move now." Before Owen could react, two figures appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the harsh fluorescent lights. They were tall, imposing, and armed. One of them stepped forward, his face partially obscured by a dark mask. "Don't bother trying to escape," the man said, his voice cold and calculated. "You've seen too much already. And now, You're coming with us. Elon's body tensed, but he stood his ground. I don't think you know who you're dealing with, he said, his voice steady. We have a much bigger fight on our hands than you realize. The masked man smirked, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. You think I care about your threats? You're both out of your league. This is bigger than you, bigger than anyone else. And now, it's time for you to disappear. Owen's heart raced as the situation grew more dire by the second. The truth about his father, the power of Project Gemini, and the deadly enemies now surrounding them. It was all coming to a head. You don't understand, Owen said, his voice shaking but filled with determination. We know what's at stake here. This technology, you can't let it fall into the wrong hands. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The man remained unmoved, his gaze unwavering. You don't get to decide that. You're just a kid, and you're out of your depth. Before Owen could respond, Elon acted quickly. In one swift motion, he grabbed a nearby metal pipe, swung it with precision, and knocked the gun from the man's hand. The other figure lunged, but Elon was faster, tackling him to the ground. Owen's pulse was racing. He had never seen Elon like this, calm, precise, and deadly. He realized then that Elon Musk wasn't just a brilliant entrepreneur. He was a man who had lived through countless dangerous situations. He wasn't just a visionary, he was a fighter. Go! Elon shouted to Owen as he wrestled with the second man. Get to the exit. Owen didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the back door, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of the scuffle faded behind him, but he knew Elon wouldn't be far behind. He reached the exit and burst through the door into the cold desert night. The harsh wind whipped at his face as he scanned the area. A car was waiting for them, parked just beyond the shadows. Elon was right behind him, breathing heavily, but with a look of fierce determination on his face. Get in, Elon yelled, pulling open the door to the car. We don't have much time. Owen jumped into the passenger seat, his hands shaking. What now? We get out of here, Elon said, slamming the car into drive. We've got the information. Now we need to figure out how to use it. But first, we need to find your father. Owen's mind was reeling, but the one thought that kept circling back to him was this. They were in the fight of their lives now. His father had been part of something much bigger than Owen could have ever imagined. And now it was up to him to finish what his father had started. The car sped through the desolate desert night, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Owen's mind was a blur of confusion and adrenaline. His hands were still trembling from the narrow escape, and his heart pounded in his chest as the cold air rushed through the open window. He glanced at Elon, who was gripping the wheel with both hands, his expression hard and focused. There was no time to waste. They were on the run now, and the weight of the truth about Project Gemini was heavier than ever. As the car zoomed past endless stretches of sand and rock, Owen's thoughts kept returning to his father. Jake Parker hadn't just gone missing. He hadn't just disappeared because of some secret project. No, his father had been caught in the middle of something much bigger, something that could change the world forever. And if Owen didn't act fast, the power of Project Gemini could fall into the wrong hands. We need to get to the next safe house, Elon said, breaking the silence. I've got some people who can help us, but we need to lay low for a while. This isn't just about your father anymore. This is about stopping a global catastrophe. Owen nodded, his mind still spinning. Who else is involved in this? My father's work. It's not just about energy, is it? Elon glanced at him, his gaze serious. No, it's not. Project Gemini was meant to be a clean energy solution, but the technology behind it is far more powerful than anyone anticipated. And now, there are factions, government, military, corporate, that will stop at nothing to control it. Some of them are more ruthless than you can imagine. Owen felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had thought that technology could be a force for good, but now he understood how easily it could be turned into a weapon. And if these factions got their hands on it, nothing would be the same. Who's behind it? Owen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elon sighed, eyes narrowing as he took a sharp turn onto a dirt road. I don't have all the details yet, but I've seen enough to know that there are multiple players in this game. Some of them are high-ranking officials in global governments. Others are corporations with more power than any country. And then there's the shadowy figure who's been pulling the strings all along. We don't know much about him yet, but he's the one who's been orchestrating everything. He's the one who took your father. Owen's mind was racing. The implications were staggering. It wasn't just about a piece of technology, it was about global power. Control over energy, control over resources. Whoever controlled Project Gemini could rewrite the future. And you think they'll come after me? Owen asked, his voice tense. Elon looked over at him, a grim look in his eyes. They already have, Owen. You're not just a bystander in this. You're a part of the story now, whether you like it or not. They know you've seen the files. They know you're looking for your father. And they'll do anything to stop you. The weight of Elon's words hit Owen like a brick. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. His father's disappearance wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was part of a larger, far-reaching conspiracy. And now Owen was at the heart of it. As they continued to drive, Owen's mind kept circling back to the encrypted file Elon had decrypted. The one that revealed Project Gemini was more than just a revolutionary energy source. It was the key to global power. But what was his father's role in all of this? Had Jake Parker been part of the plan all along? Or had he stumbled upon something dangerous by accident? The car's tires kicked up dust as they turned onto another road, heading deeper into the desert. After a few minutes, Elon turned off the engine, and the two of them sat in the eerie silence of the night. The headlights were off now, the only sounds the wind and the hum of the desert. Elon was the first to speak. "We're here." Owen looked out the window, trying to make sense of his surroundings. They had stopped near an old, run-down ranch house. It looked abandoned, but there was something about it, something that felt like the right place to be. Elon got out first and motioned for Owen to follow. "Stay close. We're not out of the woods yet." They walked quickly to the back of the house, where a hidden entrance led into a basement. As they descended into the dimly lit room, Owen felt a sudden sense of unease. This was no ordinary safe house. It felt like a well-guarded secret, hidden deep beneath layers of protection. Inside, the space was stark, but organized. There were old computers, maps pinned to the walls, and several large monitors flashing with real-time data. It was clear that Elon had been here before. He seemed to move with purpose, familiar with the place. "Who are these people?" Owen asked, looking around the room. "Old allies," Elon replied. "People who've been watching Project Gemini for years. They're the reason I know as much as I do. But they also have their own motives. That's why we need to be careful who we trust." Just then, a man emerged from the shadows, a tall figure with short, graying hair and piercing blue eyes. He was wearing a tactical vest, and his demeanor exuded authority. "Elon," the man said, offering a nod of acknowledgement. "I see you've brought company." "This is Owen," Elon said, gesturing toward the teenager. "He's the one who found the data. He's also the key to everything." The man looked Owen over with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "So you're the kid whose father uncovered Project Gemini? Impressive. But I hope you're ready for what's coming next." Owen stiffened. "What do you mean?" The man took a step forward, his expression serious. "You're in over your head. But you're not alone anymore. We have the resources to help you, Owen. But it won't be easy. We're up against some of the most powerful people in the world, and they won't stop until they have control of the project. The clock is ticking." Elon stepped in, clearly already in sync with this man. "We need to move quickly. Project Gemini is already in play. If we don't stop them soon, it's going to be too late." The man nodded. "Right. We have a lead on your father's location, but we need to be careful. There are enemies everywhere, watching our every move." Owen felt a surge of hope and fear at the same time. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, he had a chance. But it came with a steep price. His father was out there, somewhere, and the only way to save him and stop Project Gemini was to dive even deeper into the web of conspiracy. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Owen sat in front of the large monitor, staring at the screen. The crackle of static filled the room, interspersed with the tapping of keys as Elon and the other man, who introduced himself as Mason, worked furiously to decode the lead they'd gotten on Owen's father. The tension in the air was palpable, and Owen felt the weight of his father's disappearance pressing down on him. I don't like this, Elon muttered, running a hand through his hair. This whole thing is too clean. They're expecting us. Owen shifted uncomfortably in his chair. You think it's a trap? Mason, who had been analyzing a set of coordinates on a map pinned to the wall, turned to face them. His eyes were sharp, calculating. It's not a trap yet, but it could be. We've traced your father's last known location to a facility outside of New Mexico. The problem is, it's located inside a military zone, heavily guarded, high security. If he's still there, we'll have to break in to get him. Owen's heart sank. He had always imagined his father in a lab, perhaps tinkering away on Project Gemini, but not in some high-security military facility. The very thought made him uneasy. You're sure? Owen asked, trying to keep his voice steady. You're sure this is where they've taken him? Mason glanced at the screen again, his jaw tightening. There's a good chance. The data we intercepted points here, and I've got contacts who've confirmed some unusual activity in that area recently. The timing, it all lines up. Elon turned away from the console, his expression dark. This is bigger than just a rescue mission, Owen. If they've got your father, it's because he knows something crucial, something that could change the balance of power. And if they have access to Project Gemini, they won't just hold him captive. They'll make sure he's out of the picture permanently. Owen's chest tightened at the thought of his father being locked away in some facility, held hostage by the very people who had made his life so complicated. But there was no time to waste. If there was a chance to save him, they had to take it. We have to go, Owen said, his voice sharp with determination. If there's even a slim chance of rescuing him, we can't wait any longer. Mason nodded slowly, his fingers tapping against the desk as he thought. I can get you in, but it won't be easy. The military's going to have eyes everywhere. We'll need to move fast and stay off the grid. If we're caught, there won't be a second chance. Elon stepped forward, his usual calmness returning. We'll take the back roads. No communications, no GPS, just old-school navigation. We don't need anyone tracking us. Owen could feel his pulse quicken. They were about to embark on a mission that could change everything. If they succeeded, they might uncover the truth behind Project Gemini and stop it from being used as a weapon. But if they failed, how long until we can leave? Owen asked, his voice low. Mason glanced at the clock. We've got a few hours before sunrise. I'll get everything ready, gear, weapons, transportation. We'll need to move quickly, no delays. Elon walked over to Owen, placing a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to do this, Owen. You've already uncovered more than most people would ever want to know. If we do this, there's no turning back. Owen looked up at him, a fire in his eyes. I'm not going to run anymore. My father didn't hide the truth for me to just give up. I'm in this until the end. Elon smiled grimly, giving him a nod. All right, let's get to work. A few hours later, Owen, Elon, and Mason were in a black SUV, heading out of the safe house and into the cold desert night. The vehicle's tires hummed against the cracked pavement as the world outside blurred into a blend of dark shadows and moonlight. Inside, there was a sense of quiet focus. Elon sat in the front seat, scanning the road ahead, while Mason went over their plan one last time. We need to stay under the radar, Mason repeated. Once we get close to the facility, we'll ditch the car and make our way on foot. There's a narrow access point near the rear of the complex that's lightly guarded. From there, we'll have to infiltrate. Owen nodded, his stomach a knot of nerves. The weight of the mission was starting to settle on him. This wasn't just about rescuing his father. It was about uncovering the heart of Project Gemini, and the deeper they went, the more dangerous it would become. As they drove, Owen's mind kept circling back to the one question he hadn't asked. What exactly did his father know that made him such a target? What had he uncovered that could shake the world? Elon, Owen said, breaking the silence. What exactly is Project Gemini? I mean, I know it's a power source, but how does it work? How can it do all of this? All the things we've seen. Elon glanced over at him, then back to the road. Your father was on the brink of something revolutionary. The concept behind Project Gemini was a hybrid energy source, part solar, part nuclear fusion, that could create unlimited clean energy. But the real breakthrough wasn't just in the energy itself. It was in the technology that could control it, manipulate it. Owen frowned. Manipulate it how? Elon hesitated for a moment, then continued. The device your father built could harness energy on a scale that we've never seen before. Energy that could be weaponized. Imagine a power source so potent it could shut down entire grids, disable communications, even disrupt entire economies. But that's not even the worst part. The real danger lies in the fact that it could be used to control the entire planet's infrastructure. Whoever controls Project Gemini would have the power to control the world. Owen's blood ran cold at the thought. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. That's why they took him, Owen whispered, more to himself than to Elon. He was the key to it all. Elon nodded. And now, you're the key to stopping it. The vehicle bounced as they hit an uneven patch of road, and the vast expanse of the desert stretched out ahead. The sense of isolation, of being cut off from the world, was overwhelming. But in this silence, Owen found clarity. His father had never intended for Project Gemini to be used for power or control, but the forces against them were too powerful to ignore. And now, the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. We're almost there, Mason said, snapping Owen out of his thoughts. They approached a narrow road that led into the mountains. The air was getting colder, the dark sky pressing in. Soon, they would be on foot, inching closer to the facility that could change everything. And Owen wasn't sure if they would make it out alive. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to stop. Not now. The first hints of dawn were creeping over the horizon as Owen, Elon, and Mason parked the SUV a few miles from the military facility. The early morning desert air was cold and still, broken only by the faint rustle of dry sand. The place they had parked was a narrow, concealed spot between two rocky outcrops, far enough to avoid detection but close enough to make the final leg of the journey on foot. Elon killed the engine, and the silence in the car was suffocating. Owen could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he prepared for what lay ahead. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It had become a race against time. A battle to prevent Project Gemini from falling into the wrong hands. Mason was already out of the car, gathering his gear from the back seat. We'll need to be quick and quiet. The facility is heavily monitored, and I'm sure they've set up traps by now, he said, his voice steady and low. Stay close and follow my lead. Owen and Elon nodded. Elon checked his watch, then glanced over at Owen. We go in fast, we go out faster. We can't afford mistakes. Owen felt a surge of determination flood through him. He wasn't just here to rescue his father. He was here to stop a catastrophe. The fate of the world depended on them, and he wasn't going to let fear slow him down. With a final glance around to ensure they weren't being watched, the trio set off toward the facility. They moved in a tight formation, staying low, avoiding the occasional glance of surveillance cameras that dotted the perimeter of the complex. The facility loomed ahead, an imposing concrete structure tucked between rocky hills. Its high fences, razor wire, and searchlights made it look like a fortress. Owen's breath was steady but quick as they approached a narrow gap in the security fence, a weak spot Mason had identified from his intelligence. It was barely wide enough to slip through, but that was part of the plan. They weren't going in through the main entrance. The moment Mason reached the gap, he motioned for the others to follow. They crawled through the fence, careful not to make any noise. The rusted metal squealed softly, and Owen's heart leapt into his throat, but they made it through without alerting the guards. They were in. Now came the hard part. Mason led them down a series of narrow maintenance corridors, avoiding the main hallways where soldiers and technicians moved in and out. The facility was eerily quiet, and the only sounds were the soft footsteps of the group and the occasional hum of machinery. Owen's mind raced as they moved. Every step brought him closer to the truth. Every corner they turned brought them closer to the heart of Project Gemini, and, hopefully, to his father. Stay sharp, Mason whispered as they approached a reinforced door at the end of a dimly lit hallway. This is the entrance to the central lab area. From here, we'll be able to find your father. But we need to be quick. Once we're inside, we might not have long before the entire place goes on lockdown. Elon nodded grimly, eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. Let's make this fast. Mason pulled out a small device from his pocket, a hacking tool that looked like something out of a spy movie. He connected it to the door's security panel, his fingers flying over the keys. There was a tense moment of silence as the device worked its magic. Then, with a soft beep, the door clicked open. Inside was a large, sterile room filled with monitors, control panels, and flashing red lights. The air smelled faintly of chemicals and metallic sterility. Owen felt a chill creep up his spine. It was too quiet, too clean. This wasn't just a lab. It was a nerve center for something much darker. Mason gestured for them to follow as he moved swiftly through the room. The door at the far end was labeled Security Lab in bold letters. As they neared it, Owen's stomach twisted. His father could be on the other side of that door. Or worse, he could be long gone. How do we find him? Owen whispered, his voice barely audible in the thick silence. Mason paused, placing a finger to his lips as he checked the door. Then, after a moment, he motioned for them to follow him as he slipped inside. The room beyond was full of high-tech equipment, but what caught Owen's attention was the large central table. On it were several sets of monitors displaying various lines of encrypted data, but it was the man sitting at the desk, hunched over a computer, that made Owen's breath catch. It wasn't his father, but the man's face was all too familiar. Dr. Jacob Parker, Elon muttered under his breath, barely audible. That's a name I never thought I'd see again. Owen froze. It couldn't be. The man on the monitor wasn't just any technician. It was his father's image. But this wasn't a video or a live recording. It was a facial recognition program pulling up files on Dr. Jacob Parker, the man who had been the cornerstone of Project Gemini. Owen's mind whirled as the data flashed across the screen. They're tracking him, Elon said, stepping closer to the monitor. He's still alive somewhere, but they've got him locked down in a secure section of the facility. Owen felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by fear. Where is he? Mason moved quickly to another terminal. I've got his location. It's in the high-security vault section, located deep beneath the main building. Getting there will be tough. We'll need to bypass several layers of security. Elon leaned in, analyzing the data. We're not going to make it through that without raising alarms. There's only one way in without tripping a silent alarm. Mason turned toward him, raising an eyebrow. And what's that? Elon's lips twisted into a grin. We'll have to hack into their mainframe. Once we're in, I can create a diversion, giving us just enough time to get your father and get out. Owen's heart was racing. He didn't know what to feel, relief, fear, or excitement. But one thing was certain. They were closer than ever to finding the truth. They were finally going to bring his father home. The air in the facility had grown colder as they descended deeper into the complex, each step echoing in the eerie silence of the concrete hallways. Owen's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of what they were about to do pressing heavily on his shoulders. The fact that his father was still alive, somewhere down here, was both a beacon of hope and a terrifying reality. They were closer than ever to finding him, but also to discovering whatever dark secret project Gemini held. Stay close, Mason whispered, his voice low and cautious. We're about to enter the restricted sector. Security is going to be tighter here. The narrow hallway stretched ahead of them, lit only by flickering overhead lights. Owen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The place had an unnatural stillness to it, like something was waiting for them to make a wrong move. They passed through a series of locked doors, each one requiring Mason's expert touch to bypass. Finally, they reached the access point, a massive reinforced steel door marked Security Vault. It was the last barrier before they reached the heart of the facility, the place where they hoped to find Dr. Jacob Parker. Owen felt a knot form in his stomach as he stared at the door. There was no turning back now. Can you open it? Owen asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Mason pulled out another of his high-tech hacking devices. I can, but once I do, we have 5 minutes, tops, before the alarm triggers. And once that happens, they'll lock the entire facility down. We'll be trapped. Elon stepped up beside Mason, scanning the hallway behind them one last time. 5 minutes. That's all we need. Mason nodded grimly, starting the process of hacking into the door's security system. The device beeped softly, and the screen lit up with complex code. Owen's eyes flicked back and forth, trying to understand what was happening, but all he saw was a jumble of numbers and letters. The tension was palpable. Every second felt like an eternity. "Come on," Elon muttered under his breath. Mason's fingers worked quickly, typing in rapid succession. "Got it." With a sharp, metallic click, the massive steel door swung open. Inside the vault was a vast, high-tech lab, unlike anything Owen had ever seen. Giant monitors lined the walls, displaying data streams in real time, while several large containers held various pieces of advanced machinery. But it wasn't the tech that caught Owen's attention. It was the small, sterile medical area in the back of the room. There, lying on a medical table, was his father, Dr. Jacob Parker. Owen's breath caught in his throat. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but seeing his father, pale, hooked up to several machines, unconscious, was like a punch to the gut. "Is he?" Owen couldn't finish the sentence. Elon stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. "He's alive, Owen. He's just been sedated." Mason was already moving toward the equipment, checking the monitors. "They've been keeping him sedated for a while. Looks like they've been monitoring his brain activity, probably trying to extract information from him." Owen took a step closer, his eyes never leaving his father's still form. "I need to get him out of here," he said, his voice strained. "We will," Elon said, his tone firm. "But we need to hurry. We don't have much time before the alarms go off." Mason was already disconnecting the wires from Dr. Parker's body, moving with practiced efficiency. "I've got him. We just need to get him out of here without triggering anything." As Mason worked, Owen felt a rush of emotions, relief, fear, anger, all swirling inside him. His father was alive, but for how long? And what had they done to him? Why was he being kept in this hellhole? Suddenly, the sharp beep of an alarm shattered the silence, and the lights in the room flickered. "Too late," Mason muttered. "They're locking down the facility." Owen's heart sank. "We need to move now." Elon grabbed Owen's arm. "We're not leaving without your father. Let's go." Mason finished the final adjustments on the medical equipment, and with a sharp tug, Dr. Parker's body was free from the restraints. Mason swung him over his shoulder with surprising ease, and the group rushed toward the door. But as they stepped back into the hallway, Owen froze. A group of armed guards was approaching from the far end. "Get down," Elon hissed, pulling Owen and Mason into a small alcove just as the guards rounded the corner. The sound of boots on concrete grew louder, and Owen held his breath, praying they wouldn't be seen. The guards passed them by, unaware of their presence, but the close call left Owen's pulse racing. The alarms were blaring now, louder than ever, and the sound of rushing footsteps filled the hallways. The entire facility was waking up to their presence. "We're almost there," Mason whispered urgently. "The exit is just a few more turns." Owen looked at his father, unconscious and vulnerable in Mason's arms. His mind raced, and adrenaline surged through his veins. They were so close, but the path ahead was still fraught with danger. Every corner, every hallway, could lead to another group of guards. They had to be perfect. "Let's go," Owen said, his voice low and determined. They moved quickly, using the chaos of the lockdown to their advantage. As they neared the exit, Mason's face tensed. "There's one last hurdle, an armed security checkpoint. We won't get past it unless we do something drastic." Elon looked at the control panel beside the door. "Leave it to me." He approached the panel with purpose, typing in a sequence of commands that Owen couldn't follow. The minutes stretched out like hours, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the panel beeped, and the door to the checkpoint clicked open. "We're in," Elon said. "Let's move." The team slipped past the checkpoint into the final stretch. Just as they reached the last door leading to the outside, the sound of reinforcements approaching echoed through the facility. The door slid open with a hiss, and the fresh air of the desert greeted them like a wave of relief. But they weren't safe yet. Owen glanced over his shoulder as they sprinted into the open desert, the facility's gates closing behind them with an ominous thud. He could see soldiers rushing toward them, guns raised. It was only a matter of time before they were caught. "Get to the SUV," Mason shouted, his voice urgent. "I'll cover you." Owen's heart was in his throat as he grabbed his father, who was still limp in Mason's arms. Together, they ran, the distance to their escape vehicle feeling like an eternity. Behind them, the sound of gunfire rang out. The desert air was hot and dry, pressing against Owen's skin like an invisible weight. His heart hammered in his chest, not from the heat, but from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The sound of gunfire echoed from behind them, making his pulse spike with each shot. The facility was just a few hundred yards away now, but every step felt like they were running toward their doom. "Keep moving," Mason shouted, his voice sharp and commanding as he led the way, carrying Dr. Parker's limp form over his shoulder. The old man's face was pale, his body still hooked up to the machinery they had torn him from, but Mason moved with an urgency that Owen couldn't ignore. Owen didn't hesitate. He sprinted, following close behind Mason, the sand beneath his boots shifting with every step. Elon was already ahead, nearing the SUV they had parked a few miles away, the dust trailing behind him as he fought to get the engine started. Every few seconds, Owen glanced back, his eyes scanning the facility they had just escaped. There was no sign of pursuit yet, but that didn't mean they were safe. They had only just crossed the perimeter when the alarms had gone off. He couldn't shake the feeling that the whole place was going to erupt in a hail of gunfire any second. "Almost there," Elon yelled as he reached the SUV, fumbling with the door to slide into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, but it was clear they wouldn't have much time before the soldiers realized they were on the move. Mason gritted his teeth as he hoisted Dr. Parker higher on his shoulder. "We're not out yet. Get in now." Owen pushed harder, closing the gap between them and the SUV, his legs burning from the exertion. The sound of footsteps behind them, louder now, closer, made his chest tighten. They were being chased. They had no time to waste. "Go, go, go," Mason barked as they reached the vehicle. Owen climbed in quickly, slamming the door shut just as Mason tossed Dr. Parker into the back seat. Before Owen could even adjust in his seat, Elon slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The SUV lurched forward, kicking up a cloud of dust that obscured their view of the military facility behind them. The wheels squealed against the dirt, and the vehicle shot off into the barren landscape. Owen turned to look out the back window as the distance between them and the facility grew, but the sight of soldiers pouring out of the gates made his stomach drop. The facility was now fully awake, and the entire compound seemed to be on high alert. There were trucks and jeeps speeding in their direction, armed guards climbing into armored vehicles with guns at the ready. The chase had just begun. "They're coming," Elon muttered, his jaw tight with focus as he swerved around a rock formation. "Hold on." Owen gripped the seat, feeling the heat of the chase catch up with them. "How much time do we have?" he asked, his voice strained. Mason glanced over at Elon, his face hard with determination. "Not much, but if we can get a few miles out before they catch up, I can disable their tracking systems." "You better," Elon replied, eyes glued to the road ahead as the dust kicked up around them. "We've only got one shot at this." The desert sped by in a blur of orange and brown as Elon drove at full speed. Every turn, every bump in the road, made Owen's stomach twist tighter. They couldn't afford to be caught, not now. Dr. Parker's life hung in the balance, and they still didn't know the full extent of what Project Gemini had done to him, or what it would do to the world if they failed. Mason turned to Owen, his eyes sharp with urgency. "How's he doing?" he asked, nodding toward Owen's father, who was lying motionless in the back seat. Owen looked at his father's pale face, the wires and tubes still attached to him. It was a disturbing sight, seeing his father like this, so vulnerable, so helpless. But there was a flicker of hope in Owen's heart. They had him, and that was more than they could have hoped for. "He's breathing," Owen replied, though the words felt hollow. "But we need to get him to a hospital fast." Elon's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "We'll be there soon. Just hold tight." But just as the words left his mouth, a loud screech pierced the air, the unmistakable sound of a vehicle behind them, gaining fast. Owen twisted in his seat and saw a jeep full of soldiers tearing after them, tires kicking up sand as it closed in. "They're gaining on us," Owen shouted. Elon's face tightened, but he didn't slow down. Instead, he veered sharply left, throwing the SUV off course and racing toward a narrow ravine in the desert. The landscape was rough and unpredictable, but Elon was pushing the vehicle to its limit, using every twist and turn to shake off their pursuers. Mason gritted his teeth. "This is insane, Elon. If we hit that ravine wrong, we'll flip." "I know," Elon growled, "but it's our best shot. Stay low, hold on." The SUV barreled into the ravine, the wheels screeching as they cut through the rough terrain. The Jeep followed, relentless in its pursuit. But the deeper they went into the ravine, the less maneuverable it became. Soon, it would be a race for the exit. Whoever reached it first would win. The ravine twisted and turned, rising higher and higher on either side, the walls of rock closing in. The sound of the Jeep's engine grew louder as it pulled closer. Owen's mind raced. He couldn't let them get captured now. Not when they were so close. "Elon," Owen said, voice tight with fear. "We need to find a way out of here." Elon's jaw clenched as he pressed harder on the accelerator. "Trust me, I've got this." Ahead, a sharp turn came into view. Elon's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror once more, and Owen saw the desperation in his face. "Hold on tight," he muttered, before yanking the wheel hard to the right. The SUV slid sideways, its tires screeching against the loose rock. For a moment, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. The Jeep was right on their tail, just a few feet behind. But Elon's expert driving skills kept them just ahead, dodging rocks and debris as they veered off the track. Then, as if by sheer luck, the ravine opened up just ahead, the landscape shifting into an open desert road. Elon slammed the gas pedal to the floor. They had broken free. The Jeep was still chasing them, but the SUV was faster now, and with the open road ahead of them, they were in the clear, for now. "We're not safe yet," Mason warned, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "They'll be tracking us soon enough." "We'll deal with that when it comes," Elon replied, his hands gripping the wheel tighter. "We're not stopping until we get your father out of here." The open desert stretched out before them, a vast expanse of sand and rock, but Owen didn't feel the relief of escape. Every minute that passed felt like another step closer to disaster. The SUV sped across the rugged landscape, kicking up clouds of dust, but in the back of his mind, Owen could already hear the faint hum of danger closing in. They weren't out of the woods yet. "Keep moving," Mason said, his voice calm but urgent, as he checked the back seat where Dr. Parker remained unconscious. The old man's condition was stable for now, but Owen knew that wasn't enough. They needed real help. They needed to get him to a hospital as soon as possible. "We need to stop," Owen said suddenly, his voice tight with concern. He looked at Elon, who was gripping the wheel, his face locked in concentration as he drove. "We have to make sure they haven't planted a tracker on us." Elon's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, scanning the empty stretch of desert behind them. "You think they've already put one on the car?" "I wouldn't put it past them," Owen said, his jaw clenched. "We've got to check." Mason nodded. "He's right. We can't risk them following us without us knowing." Elon hesitated for a second, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. The sound of the engine roaring through the desert air filled the silence for a moment. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they catch up," he said. "If we stop now, they'll catch us for sure." "We don't have a choice," Owen insisted. "If we don't stop, they'll be able to track us anywhere. We won't have a chance." Elon didn't argue. With a sharp turn, he swerved the SUV off the main path, the tires crunching over the dry desert earth as they came to a stop behind a cluster of boulders. The vehicle's engine cut off, leaving them in the unsettling silence of the desert. Owen wasted no time. He unbuckled his seatbelt and jumped out of the vehicle, his boots kicking up dust as he rushed to the back. The others followed quickly, with Mason staying close to Dr. Parker. Elon reached into the back of the SUV, pulling out a small toolbox that he had packed in case of an emergency. The sun beat down on them, the heat unbearable, but there was no time to waste. Owen bent down and opened the rear hatch of the vehicle, scanning the undercarriage for anything unusual. He felt the metal underneath, running his hands along the edges of the frame, looking for any hidden device or irregularity. "I don't see anything," Elon muttered, eyeing the horizon as he glanced over his shoulder. "Look harder," Owen said, feeling the urgency of the moment like a pressure against his chest. The jeep that had been chasing them earlier could still be following. They had to be careful, meticulous. After a few tense minutes, Owen's fingers brushed against something small but out of place. A tiny, nearly invisible chip stuck against one of the car's frame pieces, just underneath the door. "There it is," Owen muttered, pointing it out to Elon. Elon crouched beside him, taking a closer look. "A GPS tracker. They've been tracking us this whole time." Mason cursed under his breath. "I should have known. We've been set up since we left the compound." "Get it off," Owen urged. "We need to disable it before it leads them straight to us." Elon pulled out a small pair of wire cutters and gently snipped the wire connecting the tracker to the vehicle's electrical system. The small device fell to the ground with a dull thud. Elon tossed it aside without a second thought, already moving back toward the driver's side. "That should do it," Elon said, looking over his shoulder as he slid back into the driver's seat. "We're good to go." But Owen wasn't convinced. Something still felt off. His mind raced, turning over every detail from the last few hours. There was something he was missing, something about this whole situation that didn't sit right. He shook his head. "This is just too easy. They wanted us to find that tracker." Mason's eyes narrowed. "You think they wanted us to disable it?" Owen's stomach twisted. What if it's part of the plan? What if they've got more than one way to track us? Elon's expression darkened, but he didn't respond immediately. He shifted the SUV into gear, and they were back on the road, but the tension in the air was palpable. The next few minutes felt like hours as they drove through the endless desert. "We should be safe for now," Elon finally said, glancing at the horizon. "But I don't think we should go to any major cities. They'll be looking for us. We need to find a safe house." "I know a place," Mason said, his voice steady. "I can get us there. But we have to hurry." Elon nodded. "Then let's go." Just as the words left Elon's mouth, the sound of a phone vibrating in Owen's pocket made him jump. He pulled it out quickly, surprised to see a number he didn't recognize on the screen. "Who is it?" Mason asked, his voice wary. Owen hesitated. Something about the call didn't sit right. But then, curiosity got the better of him. He answered, putting the phone to his ear. "Hello?" For a long moment, there was nothing but static. Then, a voice came through the receiver, distorted, but unmistakable. "Owen, it's me," the voice said, its tone cool but urgent. Owen's heart skipped a beat. "Dad?" The voice on the other end paused for a second. Then, "It's me, yes. I need you to listen closely. They're already tracking you. You need to leave the desert. You can't stay on this path." Owen's mind was reeling. "What? How are you?" "There's no time," his father interrupted. "I've been compromised. They've been monitoring me. You're not safe. Trust no one. You have to get off the road now." Before Owen could respond, the line went dead, cutting off abruptly. Owen stood there, holding the phone to his ear, his mind racing. What the hell was that? Who was it? Elon asked, his voice tense. "Who called?" Owen didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the phone, the weight of his father's words pressing down on him. "It was my dad," he said finally, his voice shaky. "He's been compromised. He's telling me we need to get off the road now." Mason glanced around, his hand resting on his gun. "He's right. We're not safe out here. We need to find shelter, and fast." Elon slammed the car into drive. "Let's get moving. We'll figure it out on the way." As the SUV roared to life once again, Owen's thoughts swirled in confusion and fear. Who was watching them now? Who could he trust? He didn't have answers. But one thing was clear. They were running out of time. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the desert as the SUV sped across the barren landscape. Owen barely noticed the fading light, his mind consumed by the phone call. His father's cryptic words echoed in his mind. Trust no one. It sent a chill down his spine, gnawing at him with each passing mile. Elon kept his hands firmly on the wheel, his gaze fixed ahead, but Owen could see the tension in his shoulders. Mason sat in the back, keeping a close eye on Dr. Parker, who was still unconscious, breathing but pale. The minutes stretched into hours as they drove through the desolate expanse, But the oppressive silence only added to the anxiety growing in the pit of Owen's stomach. "Where are we going?" Owen asked, breaking the silence, though he was almost afraid to hear the answer. Mason's eyes were sharp as he looked out the window. "I know a place," he said quietly. "A safe house. It's off the grid. No one will find us there." Owen nodded but didn't say anything. The more he thought about it, the more he realized they were entering dangerous territory, both figuratively and literally. There was no way to predict who they could trust, and even Mason's words didn't provide the comfort Owen wanted. The road ahead was rocky, barely visible under the pale moonlight. A few miles into their drive, Elon made a sharp turn onto an even less visible path, one that was all but concealed by the rough terrain. The vehicle jolted as it navigated through the dense, uneven desert landscape. Owen could feel his stomach turn as they veered farther away from civilization. Every turn, every bump in the road, seemed to take them deeper into isolation. "We're almost there," Elon said after a while, his voice low but calm. He'd taken them down a narrow path between jagged rocks, the walls towering on either side like silent, foreboding giants. The air was thick with tension, and Owen could feel his breath catch in his throat. They were running out of time. "Stay alert," Mason said, his hand drifting toward the handgun tucked into his waistband. "This place might not be as safe as we think." The atmosphere inside the SUV had grown heavy, as if each of them was weighing their next move, each one unsure of what would happen when they finally reached their destination. Owen glanced back at Dr. Parker, whose face was still drained of color, and his thoughts were consumed with the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. His father's warning echoed in his ears, "Trust no one." Suddenly, Elon slammed on the brakes. "What the hell?" Owen shouted as the car jerked to a halt, and he instinctively grabbed the dashboard. "Get down," Mason barked, his hand flying to the door handle. "We've got company." Before Owen could react, he heard the faint sound of engines in the distance, followed by the unmistakable headlights of vehicles approaching. They were being tracked again. "How?" Owen muttered, his heart pounding. "We disabled the tracker." Elon's jaw tightened as he looked in the rearview mirror. "It's not just a tracker," he said quietly. "They've been following us this entire time. We're being hunted." Mason moved swiftly, his training kicking in. "Get ready. If they're close, we'll have to fight our way out." Owen's mind raced. He had no idea who was after them, but he knew it couldn't be good. His father had warned him. They weren't safe anymore. Trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. Without another word, Mason opened the door and slipped into the night, moving with the precision of someone who had spent too much time in places like this. Elon and Owen exchanged a glance before following suit. The desert was quiet, too quiet, as if the very air was holding its breath. They crouched behind the SUV, the cold sand biting at their skin as the engines grew louder. Owen's pulse quickened, the weight of the situation sinking in. Whoever was coming wasn't just looking for Dr. Parker anymore. They were hunting all of them. A series of headlights flickered through the jagged rocks ahead. Owen's breath caught in his throat as he saw the silhouette of several military vehicles pulling into view, their engines growling like a predator closing in on its prey. "There's no way we can outrun them in this terrain," Elon whispered, his hand resting on the handle of a concealed firearm. "We're going to have to hold them off." Mason glanced at the others, his eyes calculating. "We don't have much choice. We fight, or we're done." Owen felt the cold weight of the gun in his hand as Mason handed it to him. He had never fired a weapon in his life, but in that moment, the reality of the situation made the decision for him. Survival. That was all that mattered now. The vehicles were close, too close. Owen could hear the crunch of tires on the rocky ground, the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the desert floor. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath, trying to ignore the tremor in his hands. "We need to make a plan," Mason murmured, his eyes scanning the landscape for cover. "Elon, you take the left. Owen, you're with me on the right. We'll hold them off until we have a window to move." Owen nodded, though his heart was racing. This wasn't just a simple chase anymore. They weren't just running from some faceless enemy. These were military soldiers, professionals who knew how to track, how to hunt, how to kill. As the first figure emerged from the shadows, Owen's breath hitched. It was one of the soldiers, a man in full tactical gear, holding a rifle. He moved swiftly, scanning the area, but he didn't seem to see them yet. Owen motioned to Mason, who nodded in return. It was time to act. Mason drew his weapon and fired a warning shot into the air. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the desert like thunder. The soldier jerked, eyes wide with shock as he spun to face the direction of the shot. But it was too late. The ambush had begun. "Move!" Mason shouted, and the gunfire started. Owen's heart pounded in his chest as he fired his weapon for the first time, the recoil vibrating through his body. The soldier ducked behind a boulder, and the rest of the enemy team scattered, returning fire. The sound of bullets slicing through the air was deafening, but Owen kept his focus. "Stay low," Mason ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. The tension was unbearable, the night alive with gunfire and the sound of men shouting orders. Owen had never imagined he'd find himself in a situation like this, not with his father's life at stake, not with the weight of the world pressing down on him. Elon's voice came over the comms, low and urgent. "We need to move. Now." Owen fired once more before ducking behind a rock for cover. The enemy was closing in. He could hear them moving, see shadows darting in the distance. They were getting closer. He had to trust Mason, had to trust that they could make it out alive. "We make a run for it when the chance comes," Mason muttered, his eyes scanning the area. "Get ready." As the enemy advanced, Owen's mind spun. Who were these people, and what did they want? Was this about Dr. Parker's research? Or was it something deeper, more dangerous? Before he could dwell on the thought, Mason's voice snapped him out of it. "Now." The night was alive with chaos. The crackle of gunfire echoed in the desert air as Owen crouched behind the boulder, his heart pounding in his chest. He barely registered the sound of Mason's voice shouting orders, or the whizzing of bullets flying past him. His world had narrowed to a single focus: survival. Mason's plan had been simple, almost too simple. Stay low, wait for the right moment, then run. But the right moment wasn't coming. The enemy had closed in too fast, their movements precise, coordinated. They were professionals, not some random group of mercenaries. These were military men, well-trained, well-equipped, and ruthless. Owen's palms were slick with sweat as he adjusted his grip on the handgun Mason had handed him. His hands were shaking, and it wasn't just from fear. It was from adrenaline. The reality of the situation, the realization that his life had changed forever, hit him like a freight train. He wasn't just running from the bad guys anymore. They were hunting him. From his position, Owen could see the shadows of the enemy soldiers as they moved between the rocks. They were getting closer. The faint whisper of their footsteps in the sand sent a shiver down his spine. He could hear Mason's voice, low and urgent, directing him to stay put, to keep his head down, but it was growing harder and harder to focus. Through the chaos, Owen's mind raced. What was his father trying to warn him about? Who were these people, and why were they after him? And then, just like that, the moment came. "Now!" Mason barked, and Owen didn't hesitate. He darted from his position, sprinting for the next set of rocks with everything he had. The sound of boots pounding the sand behind him was deafening, but Owen's mind was focused solely on the path ahead. He had no choice but to trust Mason's plan, trust that the man knew what he was doing. The gunfire was relentless. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks, sending dust and debris into the air. But Owen didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. The adrenaline coursing through his veins made every second feel like an eternity. Mason was ahead of him now, his movements smooth and calculated as he sprinted toward the next cover. Elon was close behind, his face a mask of determination. They were all moving together now, weaving through the desert landscape, staying low, staying fast. A sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them, sending a shockwave of dust and sand into the air. Owen stumbled, almost losing his footing, but he kept running. The enemy had set traps, and they were closing in. The game had changed. They weren't just trying to escape anymore. They were fighting for their lives. "Move! Move!" Mason shouted, his voice a force of nature. "We need to get to the truck. It's not far." The truck. Owen had almost forgotten. They had left it parked behind a cluster of boulders near their original position. It was their only chance. But it was a long way off, and they had to get there fast. Another burst of gunfire rang out, and Owen ducked instinctively, the heat of the bullets just inches away from his skin. He heard Mason fire back, then Elon's voice, sharp and clear, directing them to keep moving. They were close now. Just a few more yards, and they would have cover. Owen's breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning from the effort. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. The truck came into view. It was a beaten-up, military-style vehicle, and it was their only way out. They couldn't stay in the open much longer. The enemy was too close. Mason reached the truck first, ducking behind it for cover as he yelled for the others to hurry. Owen was right behind him, and Elon followed, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. "We need to move now," Mason said urgently, his voice laced with tension. "Get in the truck. I'll cover you." Owen didn't hesitate. He slid into the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he gripped the wheel. The engine roared to life, the sound a temporary relief from the constant threat that hung over them. He didn't know how much time they had before the enemy regrouped, but they couldn't afford to wait. Elon jumped into the passenger seat, and Mason slid into the back. The truck's tires screeched as Owen floored the accelerator, sending them hurtling through the desert at breakneck speed. The engine roared in protest, but the truck held together, and that was all that mattered. "Head for the mountains," Mason shouted from the back. "It's our best chance. They won't be able to track us there." Owen nodded, his eyes scanning the darkened desert ahead. The mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and unforgiving. It was their only hope. If they could make it there, they might have a chance to lose the pursuers. But even as he swerved the truck toward the mountains, Owen's mind was still spinning. His father's warning played on a loop in his head. Trust no one. He didn't know what that meant. He didn't know who was pulling the strings behind all this, but he knew one thing for sure. Someone had set them up. This wasn't just about Dr. Parker's research. It was bigger than that. As they neared the mountains, the truck jolted violently, and Owen heard a loud bang from the rear. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a cloud of dust rising from the desert floor. They were still being chased. They were still being hunted. "This isn't over," Elon said, his voice grim. "We've made a good dent, but they'll catch up." "We need a plan," Mason said, his eyes scanning the terrain around them. "We can't just keep running." Owen's pulse quickened as he thought about their options. The mountains offered some cover, but not much. They needed to be smart, and they needed to move fast. If they stayed in one place too long, they'd be trapped. "We can't stay on the road," Owen muttered, his mind racing. "We'll cut through the hills. We can lose them in the canyons." Mason nodded, his expression hardening. "Do it." Owen jerked the steering wheel to the left, veering off the main path and into a narrow canyon. The truck's tires bounced and skidded over the rough terrain. But Owen kept his foot on the gas, determined to put as much distance between them and their pursuers as possible. As the truck plunged deeper into the canyons, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The desert stretched endlessly in front of them, a dark, unfeeling landscape that seemed to swallow them whole. But even as the mountains closed in, the nagging voice in the back of his mind grew louder. The truck screeched to a halt in a small, narrow canyon, hidden from sight by towering, jagged rocks that seemed to close in on them like the walls of a fortress. Owen's heart raced as he threw the vehicle into park, taking a deep, shaky breath. The desert night felt suffocating, the only sound the pounding of his own pulse in his ears. They had managed to lose the tail for now, but Owen knew it wouldn't last long. The military men were trained to track, and they wouldn't stop until they had them. "We need to find shelter," Elon said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. He leaned over, scanning the canyon walls for any signs of movement. "They'll catch up to us soon." Owen nodded, his eyes darting around. The canyon was narrow, its walls steep, but the terrain wasn't ideal for hiding, especially not with the advanced tracking technology the enemy was likely using. Mason jumped out of the truck, his boots thudding against the dry earth. "We're not safe here," he said quickly, pulling Owen from his thoughts. "We need to move." The higher ground will give us better visibility. Agreed, Owen said, his voice tight. His hands were still trembling from the adrenaline, but he couldn't afford to let fear take over. He had to stay focused, for Dr. Parker, for his father, for himself. The team climbed out of the truck and began to ascend the rocky terrain. Owen's legs burned as they scaled the slope, the rocks scraping his palms and knees. They had to move fast, at least as fast as they could without making too much noise. Each step was calculated, the weight of the situation pressing on them. Every minute spent here felt like an eternity. Elon took the lead, moving with careful precision, while Mason followed close behind. Owen brought up the rear, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds to ensure they weren't being followed. The higher they climbed, the more distant the sound of the pursuing vehicles became, until it was nothing but a faint hum in the background. The canyon widened, and they found a small, flat ledge, a perfect spot for hiding. But the relief was short-lived. "We'll stay here for now," Elon said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "We need to figure out our next move." Owen nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The weight of his father's warning, "Trust no one," hung heavily on him. They were deep in the desert now, miles from any real civilization, and things were beginning to feel off. It wasn't just the threat of the military closing in. It was something else, something in the air. As they settled on the rocky outcrop, Mason began to check his gear, his hands moving with practiced speed. Elon pulled out a map of the area, squinting at it under the dim light of a flashlight. Owen, however, couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he had overheard earlier, the one where Mason had mentioned the possibility of betrayal. He couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. It was like a cold knot in his stomach, tightening with each passing second. Something wasn't right. "Mason," Owen said quietly, his voice low, almost hesitant. He had to know. "Is there something you're not telling us?" Mason looked up, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, Owen saw something flicker in his eyes, a flash of guilt, suspicion, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "What do you mean?" Mason asked, his tone sharp. "I mean, everything. This whole situation. It's too much. The research, the people chasing us, the way things seem to be moving so fast." Owen's voice faltered, his thoughts racing. "You're hiding something. I know it." Elon looked between them, his brow furrowing. "Owen." "No," Owen cut him off, his frustration mounting. "Mason knows something. I can feel it." Mason was silent for a moment, his eyes flicking from Owen to Elon. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right," he said finally, his voice low. "There's something I haven't told you." Elon tensed. "What are you talking about?" Mason stood up, walking toward the edge of the ledge. He looked out over the desert, the wind tugging at his jacket. "You were right to question me. I've been trying to protect you, but the truth is, this mission wasn't just about Dr. Parker's research." Owen felt a chill wash over him. "What does that mean?" Mason turned, his face hard. "It means the research was a cover. There's a much bigger game at play here, Owen. And you've been caught right in the middle of it." Owen's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about? Who's behind this?" Mason's jaw tightened. "There's a group, a private military company, funded by some very powerful people. And your father, he's not who you think he is." Owen felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "What do you mean? My father is?" "Your father isn't just some scientist. He's part of this. He's been working with them. He's been feeding them information. Information they needed for their own purposes." Owen's breath caught in his throat. "No, that's impossible. My father would never." Mason cut him off, his voice hardening. "He's been involved with them for years. They've been using his research for their own agenda. And now they want you, Owen. You're the final piece of the puzzle." Owen's world shattered. His father, the one person he had trusted most in the world, had betrayed him. Everything Owen had believed about his family, his life, was a lie. "You're lying," Owen said, his voice breaking. "You have to be." But Mason's eyes were cold, his expression devoid of emotion. "I wish I was." For a long moment, there was silence. Owen felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under him, leaving him adrift in an abyss of confusion and betrayal. Elon stepped forward, his voice low. "What are you going to do, Owen? This is bigger than us now. We need to figure out how to stop them." But Owen couldn't focus on Elon's words. All he could think about was his father, the man who had always promised to protect him, who had always been there. Had it all been a lie? Mason was right. They weren't just after Dr. Parker's research anymore. They were after Owen. He was the key to something much darker, much more dangerous. And the people chasing them weren't just after information. They were after him, and his father had played a role in it all. Owen's hands clenched into fists as the realization sank in. His father had betrayed him, and now there was no turning back. The weight of Mason's confession hung over Owen like a dark cloud. His mind raced, thoughts colliding, each one louder than the last. His father, the man who had raised him, who had always been his hero, had betrayed him. He had lied. The research, the danger, the entire chase. It was all part of a larger scheme, and Owen was at the center of it all. "Are you sure about this, Mason?" Owen asked, his voice cold and steady despite the storm raging in his chest. "Are you sure my father is working with these people?" Mason didn't flinch, didn't look away. His eyes were dark with the burden of the truth he had just revealed. "I've seen the evidence. It's not just theory, Owen. It's real." The words felt like a slap in the face. Every memory of his father, every moment of trust, was now tainted. Owen had been raised to believe that family was everything, that they protected each other, no matter what. But now, it seemed his father had been playing a dangerous game all along. Elon, who had been eerily silent since the revelation, stepped forward. "We don't have time to process this, Owen. Mason's right. They'll find us soon. We need to figure out what to do next." Owen glanced at Elon, the familiar warmth of their friendship feeling distant now. Everything had shifted. "And what? Just keep running? Keep hiding while my father's shadow looms over us?" Elon's expression softened. "I know it's hard to hear, but we have to focus on surviving first. We can deal with the rest after. This is bigger than us now. They're going to come for you, and we need to be ready." The truth was hard to swallow, but Owen knew that Elon was right. The danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. He clenched his fists, the raw emotion of betrayal giving way to the cold, sharp edge of resolve. He had to protect himself. He had to protect everyone he cared about. "We need to get to the base," Mason said, breaking the tense silence. "The company's headquarters. It's the only place they can't touch you." Owen looked at him, confused. "Headquarters? What are you talking about?" Mason's jaw tightened. "The research isn't just valuable, it's dangerous. And the company knows that. Your father knew it too. He helped them build something you're the key to. That's why they need you." A knot twisted in Owen's stomach. "What do they want with me?" Mason's face grew darker. "They want control, power. The research your father helped them develop, it's not just about information. It's about a weapon. And you're the final piece. The key to unlocking it." Owen recoiled, the words hitting him like a physical blow. A weapon? His father had been working on a weapon of mass destruction? The very idea was unfathomable. But there was no time to dwell on it. "We need to move," Mason urged. "The base is in a remote location. If we can get there before they track us again, we might have a chance." Without another word, Owen nodded and turned toward the edge of the canyon. His hands gripped the rough stone, pulling himself up the slope with a new sense of purpose. He had no choice now but to trust Mason. He was the only person who seemed to know how to survive this nightmare. But even as Owen followed Mason and Elon toward the next phase of their plan, a gnawing question lingered in the back of his mind. What if Mason wasn't telling the whole truth? The wind had picked up as they moved deeper into the canyon. The soft rush of air carried the sounds of the desert, the eerie quiet broken only by the crunch of their boots on the dry, cracked ground. Owen kept his eyes on the path ahead, doing his best to ignore the weight of Mason's words. Every step felt like a march toward something inevitable, something he couldn't stop. His mind flicked back to his father. How could he have been so wrong? How could he have missed the signs? But as much as Owen wanted answers, he knew they weren't going to come easy. The enemies who were hunting them weren't just after him. They were after his entire life's work. They were ruthless, and if he didn't act quickly, he would become a pawn in their game. Or worse, a casualty. "We need to find shelter again," Elon said, glancing around nervously. "We're too exposed out here." They had been walking for hours, moving through the narrow passages of the canyon, the light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. There was no sign of the pursuing soldiers yet, but Owen knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up. As if on cue, the distant sound of an engine rumbled through the air. Owen froze, his heart leaping into his throat. "Stay low," Mason ordered, crouching behind a large rock. Elon followed suit, and Owen quickly ducked down next to them. The truck was approaching fast, its headlights cutting through the dusk. The vehicle was a black, military-grade SUV, and it was heading straight for their position. Owen's blood ran cold. He could already hear the faint hum of the enemy's advanced tracking devices. They had found them. "There's no time," Mason said. "We need to take them out before they can call for reinforcements." Owen's pulse spiked. "How?" Mason gave him a grim look. "We do what we have to do." It was clear now. Mason wasn't just protecting them. He was leading them into the heart of the storm. And now, Owen had no choice but to follow. The truck came to a stop just ahead of them. 3 men emerged, scanning the canyon with flashlights. Owen held his breath, the moment stretching out in front of him. It was now or never. Mason motioned for him to stay back. He crept forward, his movements silent as a shadow. Elon and Owen followed close behind, crouching low to the ground, their weapons ready. The first man turned, his back to Mason, who didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, knocking the soldier out cold with a single, brutal strike. The second man never saw it coming. Elon was already on him, knocking him unconscious with a swift punch to the side of the head. The last soldier turned just as Owen moved into position. The man's eyes widened in shock. Owen hesitated, just for a moment, before firing. The soldier dropped to the ground without a sound. "Clear," Mason said, his voice low but firm. Owen's chest heaved, the adrenaline making everything feel surreal. But there was no time to celebrate. They still had a long way to go, and their enemies were closing in. They moved swiftly, dragging the unconscious men out of sight and into a nearby cave. Owen's heart was pounding in his chest as they regrouped. They had to reach the base, but with each passing moment, the odds stacked higher and higher against them. Owen glanced at Mason, whose face was as hard as stone. Had Mason been part of the enemy's plan all along? Was this just another step in a game that had been rigged from the start? There were no easy answers. But Owen had no choice now. The stakes were higher than ever, and the truth was more dangerous than he could have imagined. With the sounds of the desert night closing in around them, they set off toward the base, knowing that the final confrontation was drawing near. The battle for survival, and the truth about who Owen could trust, would soon come to a head. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?